Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out on a wet night. Dawn and I will get ourselves positioned, and we're not supposed to knock over the microphones. And I want to welcome not only all of you here in the church, but there are a whole bunch of people also with us on Zoom. So I want to welcome them as well. And for people on Zoom, we will have a question period after Dawn and I finish, if we ever do, by the way. And so if you have questions in the Zoom crowd, please just chat them in and we will find a way of getting them. So I've known Donna Morrissey for, I don't know, like when didn't I know you?
You weren't gray.
Yeah. Okay, see? Anyway, I've known Donna a long time, probably because I'm a voracious reader and I think she's one of Canada's most amazing authors. Yep. And, you know, some of you know I'm a bookseller, so I've had reason to sort of get up close and personal to what she's written. And we just have run into each other in various parts of geography, including, I remember running into you in Woody Point, Newfoundland. You were over there for the Readers Festival, right. And I was there as well. And you had just come out with The Fortunate Brother, which is maybe my favorite one of your books. Anyway, so here we are tonight. So I called her and I said, I know Pluck is coming out and would you come and do a conversation with me? So I'm going to do just the briefest of introduction, you know, in addition to what I just said, because we're going to jump right in.
This is where I blush.
Yeah, so get ready to blush. So Donna's first book, Kit's Law, some of you know, I brought a little show and tell. This is Kit's Law. It came out in 1999, and since then she has written 5 more novels in this order. Downhill Chance, Sylvanus Now, or Sylvanus, depending on how you pronounce it, What They Wanted, The Deception of Libby Higgs, The Fortunate Brother, and also she did a children's picture book with her daughter called Cross Kitty Cross. And little known fact about Donna, in her earlier years, around about the same time that Kit's Law came out, you got a Gemini nomination for a movie. I bet, who knew that? Anybody know that? Okay, so one person. So, and at some point, maybe you'll talk about what that was like. It's called The Clothesline Patch, and you can pull it up and see it. It's a 23-minute movie. Anyway, a woman of many talents is really what I'm trying to say. And also a friend. And so Donna has just written this brand new book called Pluck. And if you looked at her copy and my copy, we both have stickies throughout. So this is what we're going to try to share with you tonight. A book via stickies.
So you don't have to buy it.
No, no. No. And in fact, one of the things, so how it's going to work, I'm going to ask Donna some questions. She's going to do some answers. She's going to do some readings. And at one point I thought, I really would love it if she just sat and read the whole book. But in fact, she has done that. So if you don't want a paper book, you can buy an audio book and listen to Donna Morrissey all night.
All night long. Is there a chance to take me to bed with you?
Yeah. So
before we start, I got to ask, where's Laura, the baker?
She's right there behind me.
Laura, thank you for the bread. We were in La Have all weekend, and that's my husband there, by the way. He turned 70 today. He asked me not to tell.
Now, you told me not to say so.
I know, but anyway. His big demand was, did you get the bread from the Laura's down? No, I was in La Have, not Chester. Anyway, Laura came tonight with a big loaf of bread. So he's all happy behind his mask. And,
well, and you know, as you say that, and we say, thank you, Laura, I can't imagine how many times everybody in this room has said, thank you, Laura. Thank you, Laura. So we're going to jump right in. Donna, you were born in Newfoundland in a place called the Beaches. And in fact, it was Upper Beaches and Lower Beaches.
Up on the point and down below.
So how many people lived in the Beaches?
There was probably about, you know, counting down below, the beaches, you see, had a point of land jutting out into the ocean. So on one side of that jut of land, it was about 20 houses altogether, but on one side of the jut was up on the point, and down below the point was down below. So it became known to us who lived on the beaches, all of 15 or 20 houses up on the point and down below. But if you're mailing us a letter, you'd say the beaches. I was from up on the point. The ones down below were down below, and they're the ones we didn't talk to.
Right. And I think I learned when I was listening to you speak at the LaHaye bookstore the other day that it wasn't until you were 13 that the Beaches got electricity and at the same time television.
Oh, no, I was 12.
Oh, 12. Formative age. So can you just chat a little bit about what it was like for that community and for you for electricity and more particularly television?
Well, the first thing that happened was everybody had the monstrous, 100-watt light bulb on over their door. So suddenly, there wasn't just a moon and the stars. Suddenly we had lights. And so that was kind of neat, that television was revolutionary. It changed everything. It changed how I saw the world, literally, and little did I know at that point that outside of the beaches, there was this thing called rock and roll and hippies and hitchhikers and the old 9 yards of it. And so that captivated me. I was like in awe of this, whatever was happening. So yeah, it kind of made the beaches feel real small.
And did you go into the woods and practice dancing?
Oh, Jesus. Well, my thing, is like, sorry, I got to stand up sometimes when I'm talking because I got to look around. But anyway, I wanted to be it. I wanted to be everything. I wanted to be a hippie, and you're on a beach with 12 houses and they're all looking at you, you don't have much of a chance to be anything to Nert's daughter and Claudine's daughter, the oldest one, right? And so anyway, so I used to take mom's headbands, the scarves that she used to put around her head to make bread with and keep her hair. So I'd tie, roll it up and tie it around my head and sash it on the side and it would swing, like that. And I'd go up in the woods, sneak up door up in the woods, and I'd practice how to be a hippie, and I'd practice how to hitchhike, There's ways, of hitchhiking. I'd practice all that and how to dance, doing the rock and roll stuff. We do all that. I do all that, and I was the coolest chick on the beaches, but nobody knew it but me. So, but so television brought a lot. It also brought The Edge of Night and As the World Turns and all them soap operas.
But a few years later, your mother gave you a gold set of luggage, and at 16. So she drove you out of there.
Well, yeah, that was
how come?
Well, it was kind of interesting. It was my Christmas present, a gold luggage set. It's like, well, Jesus, that's like saying goodbye, isn't it, Ma? But she had plans for me, and the plan was you're going to go somewhere and do something with your life and make something out of yourself, or you can stay home, let your cousin Doreen and do nothing, get pregnant. So. That was my mom.
So you went off to Corner Brook at age 8. Oh, I pronounced it wrong.
Corner Brook was about 40 miles away. It was the second city in Newfoundland then, and it was like 28,000 houses there, or 28,000 population. So for me, coming from Hampton and going to Corner Brook was pretty cool. It was huge. It was awesome.
You said that the 2 years in Corner Brook were like 2 years of never-ending camp for kids with no rules and supervision.
That's what it was, because I found the hippies. I found them. They were like a magnet.
But in your book, you also say that you almost don't remember very much of that 2 years, except for a night when you were working at the store and you were going to leave to meet somebody. Do you want to just tell a bit of that story?
Yeah. Yeah, I became cool real fast. Okay, within 2 weeks I was wearing bell bottoms and tie dyes and purple gloss lipstick and the headbands, and I was it. I was cool real fast. And this one night, I guess I was probably there about 6 weeks at this point, and I was working in the cast, and my friend and I had plans for that night. We were going to do some peyote. Anybody here not know what peyote is? Yeah, it's a drug and a hallucinatory drug. And anyway, I popped my peyote as we were supposed to at 7 o'clock because we're getting off at 7:30. By the time I got off work, I'd be off on the drug as well. You see, we're capitalizing on time here. And we were going to this big party. Anyway, I got in trouble because something happened and some girl got sick and the boss was there saying, Donna, you got to stay till 9 o'clock. And I'm going, oh, fuck no. No, I said, no. Anyway, I pretended I had got severe cramps in that moment and bent over and I had to be let out the door. I was really good. And anyway, I got out the door. I was like, oh my goodness, because things were starting to happen inside of me. And I'm walking up the street, heading for my friend Jerome, who should have been waiting and there was mom and dad. There was mom and dad coming to have supper with me at the Seven Seas restaurant, which was right there. So, because this is how you do it in Newfoundland, right? You don't phone and say, oh, I'm coming in. Well, let's have dinner. Well, I don't even know. We had phones. And, but no, they just show up, right? So I had to go into the Seven Seas restaurant and sit down and watch mom and dad stare at them getting off on peyote. It was a night I'll never forget. Yeah. I can even tell you the song that was playing on the jukebox, Yeah. What was it? MacArthur Park is melting in the dawn. I can just see my mother's face was melting to the lyrics, Yeah.
So after Corner Brook, off to Toronto.
Yeah.
And then after Toronto, Alberta.
Yeah.
And there's a scene in your book where you are taking the train. It seems like the gang you were going to go out with, they preceded you. You're on the train.
Right.
And you are kind of struck with what away means.
Yes.
Page 75.
Do you want me to read that one?
Yes, please.
I don't have to read it. I don't have to look at it. I know that story so well, it's sickening.
Well, then just tell it.
Yeah, I was, being a Newfoundlander, there was always a thing, and this is in the book, I just know it off by heart. But there's a thing about Newfoundlanders and our accents, and I was from the Bay, so my accent was huge, really huge. And even people in Corner Brook found it weird, or the word back then was queer. Man, you talk some queer, and queer had a different meaning then. But anyway, you just kind of get used to it. But then when you went to places like Toronto, you were really noted for our accents back then. This was 1976 or something like that in Toronto. And Newfoundlanders didn't have this great reputation back then. But anyway, I found myself on a train heading west, and I knew enough at that point to keep my mouth shut. Don't speak, don't bring attention to yourself, because when you live, even though I spent 2 years in Toronto, it was always with my Newfoundland buddies. 16 of us jammed into one house and another 16 jammed into another house, and that's how we lived, So, but suddenly I was on a train alone with all these mainlanders, and so I think it was the second or third day on the train, I got really, really cramped because, I had to go exercise, and there was that bubble. I think they call it the cupola, where you go up and you just sit down and look all around. And that's where I went. But when I got up there was all of these friendly people. I just didn't like friendly people. And so, they were there, and I was going to duck back down. No, my dear, come, sit. So I went and sit, and they were just like, now, we're all talking about where we're from. Now, where are you from? And this guy who asked me, he has a Southern accent that was so strong. I'd never heard it before. And he's like, he said, where are you from, my dear? Something like that. And I said, Newfoundland. I maybe feel comfortable. Newfoundland. He's a Newfoundland, and you got many tourists in Newfoundland. I thought he said he was saying tourists, but this was like 1975, and tourism wasn't a word we bandied around much on the beaches. Let me tell you that. Okay. So I thought he said, do you get many turs on the beaches? And turs are these brown meat ducks that fly over the ocean that your father shoots by the dozens and brings home for supper, right? I thought he said, you get any turs? I said, oh yeah. I was just talking to Mom. Dad shot 7 yesterday. He shot them. And things just got really weird. I mean, they were all looking at me, staring at me, and I just felt compelled to keep talking. And so I said, oh, we love them, we do. We soak them in barrels of brine till their skin turns right pink and falls right off the bones, you know. And they were all staring at me as if every word coming out of my mouth was a little baby tur flapping away. And I just got out of there, hot in the face. I knew something was wrong. I didn't know what. And I got there and I just went right into the restaurant and had a strong cup of tea. And I was looking at the menu and I'd never seen meringue spilled out before, you know? So she came over. I said, yes, I'll have a cup of tea and a piece of mirage pie, please. She said, mirage? She said, do you mean meringue? I was like, well, if you got no mirage, I'll put the meringue in. That was a, you know, anyway, that was that story, okay. I went back to my seat and I stayed there till we got to Calgary, but it didn't all end there either.
No. So you can tell already that Donna's memoir is full of stories, and you can do a whole monologue on the power of story, but we're gonna just keep moving forward or we'll be here until midnight, which would be fun, but nobody brought their pajamas. So we have to, you know, anyway, so the power of story, and you can tell stories like anybody. But you were at a party and you heard somebody telling stories. And
yeah,
I mean, you came home and you said to your friend, well, doesn't she just tell a yarn? Like,
well, coming from the beaches, we were fairly innocent, and as said, even though I went to Cornerbrook, we were still fairly innocent. And going to Toronto, we just stayed with our old gang of Newfoundland. So I didn't have much worldly experience. We didn't read newspapers much, you know. We just weren't that type. And so when I got to Calgary, and there was a bunch of, I call them mainlanders, right? You know, they were mainland girls and they were women. They were all in their mid-20s. I was probably 17. And they were telling stories. I mean, I told mine, a big pile of them, because they were listening and as if they were totally enthralled by what I was saying, which I could just get talking and talking and talking. And finally, you know, they started telling some of theirs. And this one woman was from Detroit. And she was telling me about how this junkie held her up one night and put a knife to her throat for her dying, you know, and how when he let her go, she fainted. And she told other stories about how her and her mother would be in the window, crouched down, looking out. And it was Detroit. And there was fires going on out there, and there was gunshots. Their school was over the way, and they were, you know, there was all this violence happening. And I was listening to her, and she sounded like something from a cop show, you know. And I didn't believe her. Didn't believe a word she said. And after she left, I said to my friend, you know, Lisa, who was a Newfoundlander too, I said, boy, she's not the barrelman, is she? Barrelman now is a Newfoundland word for liar. She's a liar. And Lisa looked at me kind of weirdly and said, well, you know, she didn't believe your stories either. Actually, no, none of them did. And I was shocked out of my shoes. I could not believe they didn't know much. You want me to read out? This is the stories.
sure.
That I told them. And
Page 77. We've worked this out, as you can tell.
she's got it worked out.
Well, you know, we're a team.
Yeah. Okay. So Lisa gave me an odd smile. Remember the other night? Well, I did. We've been sitting with the same bunch and I'd done most of the talking, telling them how I'd grown up with no electricity or plumbing. I went to a one-room school with a coal stove for heat, and I had a stuffed baby seal on my bed that I actually helped my dad gut and stuff. I wrote about my grandmother closing up gashed hands with cobwebs that we got from the chicken coop, and how we were always sucking on brown molasses candies laced with kerosene. It was good for the cold. And white candies that she made from her vinegar plant on the cupboard shelf. that floated like a jellyfish in a thick liquid she kept in a glass jar on the cupboard shelf. And oh, I really took my time describing the man who went mad and how they rowed him 10 miles down the bay and put him ashore with some grub in a tent to fend for himself. I told him too about how father was stranded on the ice one night and a white light like a torch steadily came towards him and then past him and kept on going, leaving him staring after it like it was a ghost. And then there was the time the fairies led my austere grandfather into the woods for 3 days, and he wouldn't say a word after he returned. He wouldn't say a word except that the fairies led him astray. And I finished up by recalling how on stormy nights we all slept by the stove in the kitchen out of the fear of the house being washed out to sea by a rogue wave. Plus, I told him a pile of little things too, you know, like my first banana, my first ice cream, my first TV show, and how I thought Mr. Dress-Up's Casey was an actual little boy. I thought he had the sexiest voice. I had a bit of a crush on him, you know, and how my jaw dropped when the reception cleared one day and I saw he was a hand in a sock. Well, that was the kind of things that I told him. And you want me to end there, or what do you want?
Yeah, yeah, we're going to end there because we're going to sort of shift the mood a little bit.
She's the boss.
Well, it's, you know, I'm your friend, right? Okay.
We're not going to do the power story?
Yeah, okay, do that.
Yeah, and anyway, I learned a lot. Out of that came, it was sometime later that I was sitting in this at this dinner party. I don't know how I got invited to that dinner party. I was pretty, you know, stretched neck t-shirt and denim jeans, and these were kind of yuppies. They were more refined. They were denim, but they were styled denim. You know, I was a misfit. I don't know how I got there. And we're at the dinner party and it's elaborate. And I don't know, there's a glass for the white wine and a glass for the red wine. I'm just really not wanting to be there. And to my left was this big guy who had introduced himself as an Italian. And he was just this huge. And to my right was a Russian guy, and he was big. He had hands like gloves, you know. And actually the dinner party was in celebration of his, he had just did this sculpture of an eagle from a tree, and it was on display, and he was getting all incredible attention from that. But I knew nothing about that. You know, they were just talking about it at the dinner table. And I remember looking at him and I said, an eagle. And I'm thinking, why would he want to carve an eagle out of a tree? Why wouldn't he carve something like a set of paddles for his boat, you know, or a post, a nice post for his fence or something? What? And I asked him, I said, why? An eagle sounds hard. And he said, well, I didn't, it was always in there, you know, I just released it from this prison of wood. I'm like, what the fuck? I just looked away from him. I mean, this was only like the hors d'oeuvres. We weren't even into the entree yet. You know. So I looked at a guy to my left, the Italian guy, and he looked at me and I said, what was it like where you, and I was, you know, Italy. He said, Italy. I knew nothing about Italy. I said, what was it like where you grew up? You know, and he started talking, and oh man, his face lit up and his brown eyes danced as he told his stories. The table jiggled with laughter as he told us about his big Italian family and their fighting and dancing, their old-time remedies of garlic and herbs for curses and colds, and the Lucifer's horn his grandfather wore around his neck to ward off curses. Never, ever stick a knife in a loaf of bread or it'll bring you bad luck, he was told. You slice it from the side. Owls and spirits and dancing spiders. There was no end to his yarns. Everyone at the table leaned in, keen to tell their own stories then about their grandmothers and aunts and superstitions true as dirt. And that's when Mother's words caught up with me. Home is away when you're nowhere else. And yes, yes, it is. But whether here or there, away is simply a landscape broken down into groupings of homes. We were all youngsters once, racing around, shaped by stories and the grace of God. And I so learned to ask that question wherever I found myself feeling squirmy in awkward situations. What was it like as a kid where you grew up? And whether it was Miss Prouty Two Shoes or some hick from the backwaters, people responded. Their eyes would warm and their tongues would loosen, and we'd sit together spinning and embellishing our yarns of home, proud of our tribal roots, whose colors we each wore through our skin tones, our accents, our beliefs, and our humor. And without noting it at the time, a light was slowly dawning within me about the power of story. Our tales do more than dismantle social standings and generate camaraderie and entertainment. They create a space for one's past, touching its flesh through memory and shedding a light that illuminates ourselves and to others. And without those stories, we're only half of ourselves. Without them, that other half lurks inside like a shadow yearning for the sun. So we tell our stories. We tell our stories.
Indeed, you do, over and over again.
Oh, thank you.
So even though the light was dawning within you, you had not yet started writing. And in fact, there were a number of really dark times in your life. And I just made a short list. You married, you had 2 children, you divorced, you became a single mom. A wonderful brother was killed in an industrial accident in Alberta. You returned to Newfoundland. You were working at a fish plant and a doctor told you you were going to die from tetanus.
He gave me 6 months.
Yeah. So you actually have a chapter in your book called Darkness. And I think the writing is so powerful. I'd love it if you'd read the first couple of pages, starting with 158.
158. Okay. Just a word about that. Sorry. Where does it start?
158.
But at what?
Oh,
Oh.
I think second.
Oh,
second
the night
part.
of the
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, when my brother got killed, it was on my watch. So I suffered huge trauma and guilt and shame. And within 6 months after that, my best friend got killed in a car accident. And he was there to help me through my brother's death. So I suffered a lot of shock and trauma. And so when I was home and I went to see the doctor about something, and he diagnosed me with tetanus and told me it was terminal. So what he did was he triggered old pain. He triggered the shock that was already in my bones, because I had been so traumatized by my brother's death and my best friends. And one of my earliest memories was death. Anyway, I didn't know it at the time, what was going on. When I left his office, it was quickly rectified that I didn't have tetanus, because I went to a doctor, I went to the hospital. Anyway, I didn't have tetanus, but the damage had been done. He'd done something to my mind. He tripped my mind somehow. I don't know how these things happen, but it was 2 weeks later, or probably a week later, 7 or 8 days. And I was home. And ever since I'd seen the doctor, there was this churning inside of me, and my heart was beating. It was like everything was gunning a little too hard. And I couldn't seem to calm myself down. And then on this one particular night, I was heading up over the stairs. I just had some friends in for a gathering. It was around 2 in the morning, and I was feeling pretty good at that point because I just had a pretty good night, dancing around to the Rolling Stones as I emptied the ashtrays, that stuff. And I was part ways up the stairs, foot lifted for the next step when it happened. When something struck me inside so hard that it brought me to my knees. Terror, instant terror, as if suddenly awakened in the middle of the night by a cold, sinister breath on my face. But I hadn't been sleeping, and the lights were on, and the sinister cold was within me. I bent over, my chest too tight to properly breathe. I felt no pain, only fear. I could see just fine. Everything was the same. The beige carpet, the green wall, the window at the top of the stairs with the straggling red geranium on its sill. I could move. Holding onto the banister, I pulled myself upright on shaky legs. I made it to the top and then to my room. I lay down carefully on the bed. I tried to examine the fear, to feel around its edges, to prod it. But there was no beginning point, no ending. It simply was, suffused throughout me. My fingers ached with it. My whole being was locked in cold, hard terror. I curled up carefully on my side. I held on to myself and rocked gently, waiting for it to leave. It didn't. It didn't leave me. It stayed. I started to pray. I started mumbling the Lord's Prayer over and over and over in one mad, desperate mumbling of syllables. And then I began to rock to them. And I rocked and prayed myself to sleep. The next morning, I jolted awake. It was still there. Cold, cramped, fear paralyzing my body. Light filtered through the curtains. Birds chirped. The gentle hum of early Sunday traffic. My son Davy was moving about in his room. My daughter Bridget called to her Darby, her cat. I lay rigid, seized with terror. Then I got out of bed, hobbled to the bathroom, and threw up. I stood in the shower under the hot water, trying to loosen the fear, to scold it out. It didn't slacken. Bridget brought me that brush to fix her hair into a ponytail, chatting away. She didn't notice anything different about me, nor did Davy when we spoke on the landing. My voice sounded outside of myself. I stretched my mouth into smiles. I kept taking deep breaths, trying to open my chest, unknot my stomach, create openings for the fear to leave. I kept peering into the hallway mirror each time I passed, looking into my eyes for the fear. It could not be seen. It stayed with me for like 10 fucking years.
In fact, in true Donna style, you kept going.
I had to. I had two kids. I was
Yeah.
a single parent, and I had two kids, and I had my mom and dad and my family that I loved, and I had to.
And so just to make things even more interesting, while you're coping with all of this, you decide to go to your university.
Things happen.
Yeah. And you say that it was in your fourth year, you met a certain professor who invited you to some special sessions.
Yes.
And you had a mystical experience as a result of that.
I did. And did you want me to read about that?
Well, read or talk. What you?
Oh,
I have it more talk, but
okay. Yeah. I'd had actually after my brother's death, I had some things that happened to me where I would be awakened in the middle of the night by what I thought was a dream, and it would be a dream about my brother, of course. And when I would awake, there would be this feeling inside of me of profuse peace and light-hearted niceness, just like the drugs I'd done way those years back in Toronto. It was beautiful. And I had about 3, 4, maybe 5 of those, I think 4 of those dreams. And anyway, it's difficult to describe them. I do a better job of it in here. And, but when I would go back to bed, when I wake up in the morning, the feeling would still be there, but not as strong it was in the middle of the night. And eventually it would just wear off. And so this was, because I suffered paralyzing guilt, but all of that to say that none of that changed me in any way. They were experiences that I couldn't understand, but I craved them. I was like a junkie for them, for the light, And then in university, 8 years later, this professor invited me to come to this, what is it you're sitting around in a circle, is visual imagery. And she called me in her office one day and she said, whenever you walk into a room, it's like 7 people walking with you. She said, that's how crazy your energy is. She said, you're destroying yourself, but what's going on with you? And you know, I was like, anyway, so she invited me to this visual imagery with her outside. She didn't do it as part of her work, but it was in the community. So I went there with my girlfriend, Karen, and it was really cool. You sit around and she would say things like, you're in a room. Meanwhile, she's got us all meditative and the lights are down and you're in a room and your eyes are closed. And I imagine a library. And, you know, she said, you know, you walk to a shelf and you take something from a shelf. So of course, in my head, I walked to a shelf and I took a book. And then she said, you walk and you sit down. And I found myself walking and sitting down. So all this is imaginary. Meanwhile, my friend was in a totally different space and she was seeing a sewing machine, and because she was a designer. So everybody has their own unique experience, whatever you want to visualize. So I thought it was pretty cool. And after we all shared our stories and we talked about it, and it was the second time I went the following week that this happened. So, you know, this is a strange thing to be telling people, but we are in a church. I mean, my God, pardon the pun. She did it again. So we went into our relaxation, our meditative trance type thing. And she said, you know, you are walking in a road. And of course I saw the dark road of Hampton in front of me, which was pretty natural. And then she said, there's somebody walking towards you. And I instantly saw my brother, Ford, of course, the one who had gotten killed accidentally. And she was already speaking. You know, I was startled to have imagined my brother because I didn't like to think about my brother anymore, you know. She said, that person is giving you something. And just like that, he was holding it in his hands and he was saying, forgiveness, you know, forgiveness, forgiveness. He said it 3 times. And I was alarmed, and I didn't disrupt anybody, but I just opened my eyes and said, this is all bullshit. I'm just opening up cans of worms there. Why did that happen? Why am I imagining these things? I'm not coming back here no more. And this is bullshit. And anyway, as soon as I could get out, I did. And so what happened was the following week, I had no intentions of ever going back because, you know, I just thought I didn't want to deal with that stuff again. I figured it was all dealt with, you know, but it hadn't been, of course. I couldn't. It was part of the breakdown that I was going through because I was still going through that, you know, except that I had found ways to cope. But anyway, the following week, my girlfriend, you know, was called and said, "You ready?" I said, "I'm not going." Anyway, we had a fight and she really wanted to go. She didn't feel she could go without me because I was a student, that was my professor, and she was just my friend. And so she guilted me into going. So I went. And when I sat down and we went into visualization, I started fantasizing about this guy in the bar that I was hanging out with. I didn't go into you know, I broke all the rules. And so I was in a fine time, actually. And when it was all over, for some reason, and to this day, there are questions that are not answerable. You know, she asked me to stay behind with my friend Karen to have tea with her. And she said she did that because we weren't part of her senior group. You know, the other women they were professors and they were she was going for tenure. So she didn't feel she could share this with anybody in the university. Because, you know, but she felt she could with me because I was like an old hippie type thing still at the time, and my friend too. So with us, anything goes. So she was okay to share it. And she said that last week, after we were sitting down having tea and she was comfortable, she said, last week, there was something happened here. She said that scared me a lot. And she said, I just need to share it with somebody. But she said, after you all left, there was a presence here. She said, I didn't see anybody. She said, but I knew it was a young man. She said, he was about 19 years of age. She said, he kept saying, forgiveness, forgiveness, forgiveness. She said, he said it 3 times. She said, I got really scared and I called up someone that she knew. She said, I slept with the lights on that night. And she had no idea that she was speaking back to me what I had, you know, conjured in my mind. Or so in some way, my brother had manifested himself through her to me. Who knows how these things work? I don't know, but that was the experience. And from that, a lot of things came into place. I'd like to read. Did you have that marked, Bart, about what I got from that?
I can find it.
When I was going down the road. Right, I got it. Okay.
You got it? Great.
Yeah. Yeah. It started It didn't all come in that moment, you know, these thoughts. It took a long time for me to understand what that night meant for me and what that gift was that my brother had brought to me that night. Because he had tried to bring them to me before through the dreams, but they didn't take hold. So that night, I left the Professor Burns. I just ran out of her door. I sucked in the night air, trying to absorb the profundity of the moment. Ford had come before through my dreams. Now he had come again. All these years later, he had come again. The spattering of stars across the cool night sky, seared like pinpricks of ice, with each thought zinging through my mind. Thoughts that had always been there somewhere, clouded, but coming through now with absolute clarity. Not all of them, though. It would take many reflective hours and long walks and deep readings to come to terms with what had been given to me on that night. That there is no one moment. That my dream of the 3 white lice that had foretold what would happen. Ford's death was already approaching as we lay in our beds that night before the accident. Other worlds advancing towards ours. Their coming together so deeply rooted in the past that there was no beginning. From before his conception, 40 had been moving towards his death. Forgive him that moment of standing behind that truck. Forgive that young fellow behind the wheel whose life had brought him to that moment of distraction. He didn't turn on the safety brakes, and there was the backing up of the truck that killed my brother. Forgive the collision of their worlds in that moment that continues living through the lives of others. Forgive me my smallness of mind and believing I could have or might have or should have changed the course of a moment that had been careening towards us for thousands of years. Forgive God for shaping us all within the confines of the one transcendent moment that stretches through to eternity. Yeah, yes. Yeah.
Amazing. Amazing.
Yeah, I mean, we all get in these thoughts of if we'd only done this, if we'd done that. You can't, because you can't, because there was something that led to that and led to that. To undo that, you would have had to undo that and that. And you're just going back into, timelessness.
So in the collision of moments,
Yeah.
then there's another collision of moments. A couple of years after you finished your Bachelor of Social Work, you've been working with juvenile delinquents, and you met somebody who became a significant mentor for you. Her name was Ellie.
Yes.
And I hope you all read this book, because I mean, every page is fantastic, but this journey with Ellie is an amazing thread through the book. And Donna talks about meeting her, and she's going to share that with you. Yeah.
Ellie, yeah, she was major in my life. She's the one that I started writing because of her. Mm-hmm. Miss Ellie O'Rourke was a maelstrom in human form. She changed everything. I met her in a class in St. Francis Xavier University, Antigonish, Nova Scotia, 2 years after graduating from Memorial with a Bachelor of Social Work degree. After a short stint working with juvenile delinquents, I'd arrived at the unalterable conclusion that they all belonged in boot camp with 1 meal a day. In another short stint, this time working with an elderly blind couple, I'd narrowly missed being hauled before the courts for getting drunk with them. Then came a few more stints working with abused women, snarling into supervisors' faces, snarling with clients, snarling at board members and government officials. It seemed I was no more trainable than my clients. But around that time, coincidentally, I learned of St. Francis Xavier's 6-week summer program in community development for adult learners. I liked the idea of that, adult education. So blah, 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 blah. I find myself in the classroom in Antigonish. And there was this woman. 10 minutes into the lecture, the door swung open and a tiny, wiry woman rushed in. "Sure, here y'all are," she said in a strong Irish lilt. "Where's the signs?" She pointedly asked the professor. "I've been walking through the corridors for hours." And in a swirl of skirts and scarves, she waltzed to a seat next to me, her auburn hair pinned messily atop her head, wispy bits floating around her pixie face. She was about 15 to 20 years older than me, her face heavily lined, but her eyes bright as stars. When she turned slightly, caught my eyes, and winked, I nearly giggled. She smelled of cigarettes and secrets. At lunchtime, she lit up a smoke and leaned over the cafeteria table, grinning back at me. Yes, Donna girl, the well-behaved woman never makes history, do they, love? Tell me, what are you doing here? I'm thinking myself mad for taking this on at my age. We talked and chain smoked through lunch. Her name was Ellie O'Rourke. Back in her 20s, she'd left Belfast for Canada and was now a retired university professor with a PhD in world religions, never married. I'll always be a miss, she said. No kids. And with a plan to start an outreach program for spirituality needy living in isolation. She'd studied Jungian psychology, she told me, and for 2 years had immersed herself in analysis. Now, through correspondence with a Jungian and Zurich, she was continuing her personal work in dream analysis. And I said to leap ahead here to page 208, and I followed her around as if she'd been imprinted on me. She quoted scripture and poetry and laughed at herself and at me as we cozied into corners, smoking and speculating about people around us, comparing them to certain characters in literature or film. She shied away from the talk of her personal life, focusing on mine, especially the dreams about Ford. Often, when we'd walk along trails or sandy beaches or anchor over mugs of coffee in cafes, she'd take the time to analyze some of my dreams, teaching me how to identify symbols and meanings. Always the unconscious, love. When you dream of water, it's always about what's beneath. Draw it up, Donna. Always draw up the deep, girl, or it'll take you down. She started relating some of my experiences with mental illness. She took me to a secondhand bookstore and loaded me down with books on saints, self-help, and Jungian psychology, and 5 George Eliot novels. Read, love, she said, read, find yourself.
So that's a tease for a journey and a big surprise ultimately. So
Yeah,
that we're not going
to go there.
Nope,
Yeah,
we're not going to go there.
Yeah.
But she really said, find your voice. And she had a whole scheme about, you could write 2 Harlequin novels a year and make money, and then you could write really what you wanted, and so on and so
Yeah,
forth.
she was the one.
But the other person who, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit because I just checked the time. So there's 2 more things I want Donna to read. But the other person who I think was very significant in terms of being almost not a partner, but a journeyer with you as you wrote Kit's Law, was your mom. And you were home. She was ill and
my mom had been
treatments.
diagnosed with breast cancer, and she was 58. And so we were all together as a family. We all moved to Halifax, and we were just nurturing my mom through the final months of this.
But one of your favorite sections in the book is cutting her hair.
Yeah.
Which
my mother was we both had thin wispy hair, and so people who don't have hair always talk about it. People who have hair, they talk about it, but they don't know any different. People look over there, like, look like you. Like, anyway, me and my mom, we had this thin wispy hair, and so one day we went to get a wig for mom because we had to cut mom's hair off because of the chemo. But while she was there, she saw this great big blonde wig. It was like a Dolly Parton wig, or not Dolly Parton, but Twisted Sister. You remember what's the name of Twisted Sister with the big long? And mom looked at it and she said, I always wanted to be blonde. So she took it as a joke, And when we went home, before we went home, I called my sister Wanda and I said, you're not going to like the wig that mom chose. And my sister Wanda was like, I don't care what she chose. She can have whatever she wants. Poor mom. So I said, yeah, well, you just remember that when she walks in the door. So all too soon, we were at the door, and mom walks in with the Twisted Sister locks. And my Wanda is like, no, you're not wearing that. Mom said, yes, I am. And Wanda goes, no mother of mine is wearing something. You look like a whore, Anyway, Wanda started screaming, went upstairs. And Donna, what'd you let her? It was a big scene. And after a while, mom went upstairs and said, look, took it off and it was a joke. She's not. And Wanda didn't find it funny. She did not find it funny at all. And so then we had to cut off Mom's hair. And it's just one of these things that I will never forget. And it found its way somehow into the first novel that I wrote. And I just wanted to read that to you. So we took the chair and we carried it into my sister Wanda's bedroom. And my other sister, Karen, she's the one who cuts hair on the side, So Mom was sitting there and Karen was cutting her hair. And Wanda and I were sitting on the side of the bed watching. Yeah. Mother sat dully in the chair. Karen is set in the middle of Wanda's bedroom. Karen wrapped a towel around Mom's shoulders as Wanda and I perched on the bed, fidgeting. Hair. It is everything. It is a woman's cloak. It is her brooch, her favorite color, her hope for a better tomorrow once the perm is set and the rollers are out. It is her armor. Snip, snip. A piece of Mother fell to the floor. Snip, snip. Another piece of her fell. Karen's fingers trembled, and a lock of hair she'd lifted slipped from her fingers. She lifted it again, awkwardly holding the scissors for a better angle. Snip, snip. Oh, Mom. Mother's face was pinched now, as though she sucked on something sharp. And I turned away, looking through the window at a bird fluttering onto the windowsill. Snip, snip, snip. Oh, Mom. Karen ran her hand tenderly over our mother's scalp. Here, feel it, she said to Mom. It's right smooth and warm. It looks just like Sinead O'Connor. Who the hell's that, said Mother. Her grumpy tone belied the softening of her mouth as she brushed hair off her shoulders, and a snippet fell onto her foot. She nudged it off as though it were dirt, and Wanda half sobbed, and Karen spoke hard through her trembling lips. She's the most beautiful woman in the world, that's who she is. That's not good enough for you? Yes, mine now, said Mom. And I knew she needed anger just then. She needed it as a crutch as she rose from her chair and started towards the mirror on the wall. Her eyes were sooty dark against the pallor of her skin and the white of her scalp. Please don't look, I pleaded silently. Mom, please don't look and see the brick and mortar of your worn down house. Don't see blood and skin over bones, but hear instead the beating of your heart with its primal rhythm, heralding your entry into time and waiting now to herald your return home. Your bald head and crippled arm and shorn chest are nothing compared to your humble true self, the self that will forever resonate through the hearts of those who love you. She stopped before the mirror. She emitted a small gasp and then stepped back as though the sight were too much. Then she turned towards us, uncertainty clouding her eyes. Well, I'm still the same old bird, I suppose, she said, just lost a few feathers. And Karen laughed, and I laughed. Wanda gave another half sob, and Mom pulled a scarf from her hands. Give me that. I covers my head. It's fairest, Donna. Go gets the car. We goes and gets another wig.
So I'm going to ask Donna to read one more section, and we've tried to give you examples from this book of sort of highs and lows and humor and poignancy and stories. But to me, the book, in addition to the stories or holding all the stories together, is just deep wisdom, and I'm grateful for that. And in fact, the book starts with a quote from The Prophet by Khalil Gibran, and any of you who know his work, it's the quote about joy and sorrow, and you can't have one without the other. But I'm going to ask Donna to read the page about joy, and then we're going to open it up to questions, and then we'll see what's next after that.
Yeah, joy. Yeah, my book that I wrote with my mom as she lay dying, was it became a national bestseller and it went international, and it was the Japanese translated it, and I was always kind of stunned about that. Why? And I asked him once, why would they choose a book from, rural Newfoundland? And she said, it is a story of faith, the elderly, and family love. That's why. She said, it's what our Japanese culture was built upon, and we struggle now to keep it. So it matters not our differences then, because we all eat from the one basket of life with its fruits of joy, kindness, goodness, and patience. We all speak the universal language of love, laughter, fear, and grief evoked by this tremendous and terrible journey through life. And of the fruits in the basket, it's joy I covet the most, as it allows me to see the beauty in a frost-itched window and hear the singing of broken glass being swept by my mother's broom. And joy is fed by love. It's fed by gratification and blessedness, and it is the seventh heaven. It was the memory of joy that kept me going during my trials of physical and spiritual impoverishment. It was the memory of joy that sustained me through the dark hole I fell into during my 40s. Joy that held me throughout the hellish battle for sanity in a world suddenly turned on its head. And yet, it was during those moments when joy was blanketed by fear, grief, contempt, guilt, shame, and so many other ills that I was kicked, bruised, and hurting into consciousness, which is, I believe, where God lives.
If you don't have any questions, we have more things we can talk about, but I imagine you may have questions, either those of you here or those of you on Zoom. So if you have a question, please just put up your hand and I might repeat it because we have mics and you don't. Anybody have a question? Anybody on Zoom have a question?
Don't be shy.
Sandra.
Donna, I'm a fourth generation Nova Scotian, but all my roots are in Newfoundland and I really wonder if your being, what you are, what you've become, what drove you, what that, do you put any, is your life just here and now with your growing up, or do you feel there's a thread in Newfoundland of people who feel deeply as you do, who come out of hardship, who I have, we all have hardship in our life, but I do feel my roots strongly at age 77.
Yeah, I've met.
Did you all hear the question? If I had to paraphrase that question, Sandra, I'm going to just try to do a really short one. Are you who you are because of Newfoundland and centuries, or are you who you are because of just now?
Yeah,
Not fair, but.
Yeah, the Newfoundland in me is strong, and the Newfoundland culture is strong, and the sense of humor, and sure, but it was family love that made me who I am. And whether or not we have stronger family love in Newfoundland is, I don't know. I've met people who love pretty fiercely, and I've met some pretty incredible people on my journeys, so I don't think that, I've met survivors everywhere. So I love my culture, and it's given me a lot, but I think that everybody, it was, as I read, everywhere, every place is a coupling of communities, and it's all about love and neighbors and people and telling your stories. So I imagine there's communities everywhere that loves as fiercely as we do. Yeah.
Another question, Chris?
Yes, I wonder if I could get you to speculate just a little bit. If you think about a 12-year-old in current times in beaches, what they would have the treated, what they would be better off with, and what they would be worse off with compared to you in the beaches.
Well, when we lived there, it was his own enclave, and it was like a bell jar around this area. And I lived in this bell jar, and I didn't know anything that was outside of it. And I write a lot about that in the book in the beginning years, because it was a concept of a way that I didn't understand. I didn't know where. I thought a way was a place. And I always wanted to go to Away, to visit Away, So it was a bit of a riddle for me. One of the things that what it gave me, I think, was the solid sense of family and community, because everybody up on the upper beaches was an aunt or an uncle or a first cousin. So we were all related, and everybody knew you, Donna, Nurk's daughter. And if I was caught doing something, it didn't matter who caught me. I still get to whack inside the head and sent home. And so, and it was more than that. When I wrote the novel Kit's Law, it was about a mentally challenged, and a lot of people found it very curious that I would write about a mentally challenged woman, and it was so natural for me because I had a mentally challenged cousin who was younger than me, and you hung around with everybody in a small place. So you got to know people on different layers, different levels. You got to know the elderly as well as the young. If I lived in a community here, and my daughter right now, and there's a mentally challenged kid living next door, she's not going to go hang out with her. It's not a chance. But on the beaches, you had no choice because it was Aunt Claudine's girl or your Uncle Lissa's daughter. And if you're going berry picking, you got to take her with you. You got no say in the matter. So as a result of that, you spend time with different people. And I always remember this moment when we were up in the woods berry picking, and we had to take Josie with us, and we didn't want to take her, but we had to. And everybody had their buckets half filled and was running on to the next spot. And I tripped up and fell down, and all my berries got wasted. You think they were going to stop and help me pick up my berries? No, but Josie did. Because it didn't matter to her if her bucket was full or not. She had no concept of who's going to get the most berries, get the most praise when you get home. And she stayed, she helped me pick up my berries. And in that moment, you're loving her because she's nurturing you. So, so the next day, you're not going to kick her or you're not going to run from her because she's Josie. She helps you. So you learn different relationships, and that's one of the greatest things that came out of that environment for me, was learning and understanding different personalities and people, and living with them anyway, no matter how much they drove you nuts, Yeah. And it's finding the human, it's easy to stereotype, but that's what I should have said. It's like, no matter what kind of person they are, you find a human in all of them. Yeah.
Judy, you had your hand up, and then I'll go to Zoom.
I was thinking what you said about the hair. I kept waiting for Wanda to go back to that wig. Did she give it back to your mother?
She still don't laugh at that story. It was 24 years ago. Sister Wanda still won't laugh at that story. Because it was so much more to it than what I just presented here. And no, my mother was never going to wear it. It was only a joke, but it was part of our mother, it's part of her, she was like that.
I just thought Wanda might have relented.
Not a chance. Not a chance.
From the world of Zoom.
From Zoom. Can you trace your family roots to Europe or beyond? And what countries are your ancestors? When did your first ancestors come to Newfoundland, and why Newfoundland?
Well, I haven't done the spit test yet, but I do know that my father's family was English and my mother's family was Irish. And and my father's family moved to the beaches. My mother's family moved somewhere else, and they met. And so that's why we're half English and half Irish in my family. So it's kind of like that a lot. And that's all I know. And why Newfoundland? I don't know. There's a story that the three brothers were horse thieves and they got kicked out of the community. And that was quite common back then, if being a horse thief and being kicked out of your community. And so the story goes that Uncle Bill and this one and that one, they all got kicked out and they all came this way. And we were, yeah, if they had any sense, they would have went further south. Tells you right there the kind of people they were.
Is there another question on Zoom? No. Anybody here?
I'm a eclectic sort, I like whatever is big in the moment that people are reading, and it's a good yarn, it's a good story. I love that. I'm especially devoted to George Eliot. I think she's the greatest novelist that ever lived. And my favorite current artist that is Cormac McCarthy, and he's a weird one because he treats women like dogs, and he's awful, and his books are terrible to read. You're nodding. Do you know Cormac McCarthy? No, but anyway, he's an incredible wordsmith, and I just love him. But there are others as well, yeah.
I have a question for you, and I'm going to quote because you put it in the book, which made it easy
Okay.
for me.
Okay.
Albert Camus wrote, "Fiction is the lie through which we tell the truth."
Yes.
So you've written 6 pieces of fiction and this nonfiction. Which is easier?
Well,
Tell the truth through lies or just tell the truth?
it was kind of weird for me because I wrote 6 novels, and I've got another one actually not published yet that I'm going to start editing soon. And in every one of them, I tried to tell the story of my mother. I tried to tell the story of my father and my brother and me, and our little baby brother Paul. I've been always trying to tell. So every time I write a novel, it would be with something in mind. And there was, the old woman at Kitty Corner that we didn't even touch on, May, who inspired 2 novels. But fiction hijacks your pen. It takes you somewhere else, and no matter how I wanted to get this or that in there, it would never go because the story became its own story. But so by the time I got my 7th novel wrote, I pretty much had rehearsed my own story a lot of times, and so when I sat down to write it, it was fairly easy for me because I knew my stories, I knew them well, and truth. It is more difficult to get at the truth in memoir than it is in fiction, that's for sure. And the simple reason for that is because when you're writing memoir, you are assuming ownership of a story, but really it's not just you, it's your family story, it's your friend's story. So it gets a little bit more jagged and complex and complicated. So you got to be careful of people whose toes you're stepping on, etc. Whereas with fiction, you're the queen or king. And you can do, and plus you do the research, and things are, all the ends are neatly tied in when you're doing fiction. You start here, you do your arc, and you end it. And in real life, it doesn't end nice and tidy. I can write. I actually just wrote a 40,000 word piece on my father after my mother died. And we suffered another tragedy in my family. We've actually suffered 2 more. So life goes on. It's not neat and tidy like fiction.
So you've got a novel ready to be edited.
Yeah. And
this memoir ends when your mom dies,
Right.
and Kit's Law
yes.
came out. So that was 1999, and it is 2021. So I'm imagining there's a memoir.
I've got it wrote, actually. It's 40,000 words. It doesn't fit a genre yet because they have novellas. You get a novel or a novella, but they only have memoir. They don't have movellas, because you need like 80,000 words, and I've got 40, but it's complete. So I might create a genre here called movella. And that 40,000 words was just about my father. Everybody, you're all sitting there, everybody has a life, and everybody here has like 15 or 20 stories inside of you. Guaranteed you each have a memoir inside of you. There's no doubt about that, but so yeah, as we live, so we write.
So you bought a ticket for something that was going to be an hour, and it's now an hour and 20 minutes. So I want to honor your expectation. Donna's not running away because in the room next door, should you want to buy a copy of the book, there are copies here to buy, courtesy of the Bookmark in Halifax. Want to support our local independent bookstores. But on behalf of everybody here, before you get ushered out carefully by Anne row by row, and maybe we'll see you in the back room for chatting or autographing, I don't know. I don't even know how to say thank you.
Oh. Thank you for honoring the book.
I don't mean to completely cop out, but you are a gift in terms of your writing. You're a gift in terms of your presence.
Oh, she's making me blush.
And you came down through that horrible rain tonight, and we are blessed.
We got to get
Because
back
of you.
too.
Thank you.
But it was my husband's 70th birthday. What a greater gift.